You corrupt bastard. You are a disgrace to the American Constitution, and right here I'm going to prove it to you. Y'all stand here and watch this corrupt filth, who has been tried for over $30 million corruption scandal, to determine your verdict. Here's proof of him accepting bribes from these skanks over there. Mr. Harold Voss, we are the FBI. You're under arrest for judicial bribery, jury tampering, and racketeering.
There is a particular kind of courage that does not announce itself. It does not arrive in a courtroom wearing a tailored suit with a briefcase full of credentials. Sometimes courage arrives in worn shoes and a faded jacket and sits quietly in the back row where nobody thinks to look. And sometimes the most dangerous person in a room full of powerful people is the one that none of those powerful people have bothered to see. This is the story of one of those rooms and one of those people. It was a Monday morning in October when Elijah Moss first took his seat in the back row of Courtroom 7 at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Elijah did not arrive the way most people arrived at a courthouse on a Monday morning. Elijah arrived on the number 14 bus from the east side of Charlotte with a paper cup of gas station coffee and a canvas tote bag that had been washed more times than it had been replaced. And Elijah walked 4 blocks to the courthouse in the October cold without hurrying because Elijah Moss had not hurried anywhere in 6 years. And Elijah sat in the back row. And Elijah opened his tote and removed a yellow legal pad and a ballpoint pen and a small worn Bible that he set beside him, not because he planned to read it, but because a man with a Bible and a legal pad in a courthouse gallery reads as a grandfather waiting for a grandchild's hearing. And grandfathers waiting for grandchildren's hearings were the most invisible people in any American courtroom. At the defense table sat Naomi Carter, 31 years old, 4th grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary School, navy blue dress pressed by her mother the night before, hands folded, facing forward, not looking at the gallery behind her. And at the prosecution table sat District Attorney Conrad Brett, tall, silver-haired, wearing his suit like an argument, surveying the courtroom with the satisfied expression of a man looking at territory he already owns. And his eyes passed over the gallery without stopping. And his eyes passed over the back row without stopping. And Judge Harold Voss took the bench. And the trial of the state of North Carolina versus Naomi Carter began. And Elijah Moss uncapped his pen. And Elijah Moss wrote one line on his legal pad. That line read, "She is innocent, and she knows that innocence alone will not save her in this room." And Elijah underlined the word room. The case against Naomi Carter had begun 7 months earlier when the principal of Lincoln Elementary School called her into his office and told her a complaint had been filed. The complaint said Naomi had shown her 4th grade class racially inflammatory materials, images of the civil rights movement, images of police violence against black protesters, causing a student named Brandon Whitfield significant emotional distress. And Naomi had said, quietly and clearly, those materials are part of the approved 4th grade social studies curriculum for the state of North Carolina. Every image is in the state-approved textbook, but the principal had looked at his hands. And the principal had said, "I know Naomi, but the family has resources." Brandon Whitfield's father was Congressman Dale Whitfield, and Congressman Whitfield had made 2 phone calls that had nothing to do with the school board and everything to do with a judge who had a lake house in Catawba County and a retirement account that grew at a rate his public salary could not explain. And by the time those 2 calls were finished, the trajectory of Naomi Carter's life had been altered in ways she did not yet know. Because the charge eventually filed against Naomi was not administrative. It was criminal, specifically contributing to the delinquency of a minor, a charge carrying 2 years in prison and the permanent revocation of her teaching license. But what Elijah already knew, what had brought him to this back row in the first place, was something nobody else in that building knew yet. Elijah Moss had not come to this trial as a spectator. Elijah had been watching Judge Harold Voss for 4 years. And what those 4 years had produced was sitting in a canvas tote under a worn Bible in the back row of Courtroom 7. And it was everything. Judge Harold Voss presided over Courtroom 7 the way a man presides over something he owns rather than something he serves. And this was visible in everything Voss did, from the way he took the bench each morning to the way he addressed the attorneys, which was cordial to Conrad Brett and technically correct, but subtly diminishing to Priya Akaffer, the 29-year-old public defender who had been carrying this case for 14 months, and who Elijah could see was good, genuinely good, but was fighting in a room that had been arranged against her before she walked in, and Elijah noted all of it on his yellow legal pad. The sustained objections, each technically defensible, each precisely timed to interrupt Priya at the moments her argument built momentum. The jury, 3 specific jurors in seats 4, 7, and 11, whose quality of attention was different from the other 9, not the attentiveness of people deliberating, the stillness of people who had already decided. But what concerned Elijah most on that first day was what he saw through the interior window during the lunch recess, the narrow window partially obscured by wood paneling that most people in the gallery did not know existed. And what Elijah saw through it was Judge Harold Voss in the corridor outside his chambers talking to a man in a dark blazer, and the man handed Voss an envelope, and Voss put it inside his robe without opening it, and the man walked toward the building's east exit. And Elijah wrote on his legal pad, Day 1. Lunch recess, 12:47 p.m., envelope, dark blazer, east exit, and Elijah circled it twice. And Elijah turned to a fresh page. The courthouse had a room on the second floor, storage room 2E, that Elijah had converted into his base of operations. Behind a shelf of archived court documents from 2009 through 2014, Elijah had set up a folding chair, a lamp, a laptop, and a small black external hard drive containing 4 years of material on Harold Voss, financial records, case patterns, the Delaware LLC, the lake house purchased for cash, the network of payments traced back through Raymond Cole to Congressman Dale Whitfield's political operation. But on the 9th day of the trial, Elijah returned to storage room 2E and found that something had changed. The manila folder on the chair was nearly closed but not precisely closed. The external hard drive had been rotated, connector port now facing away from the wall. Someone had been in this space. Someone had connected to his hard drive and browsed it for 11 minutes, and the access log confirmed it, and Elijah sat in the folding chair and understood that the operation had changed. What had been a patient, long-game investigation conducted from safe distance had just become something that operated on a shorter timeline. Because if whoever had been in this room had gone to Harold Voss with what they saw on that hard drive, then Harold Voss knew. And if Harold Voss knew, then 4 years of careful work was about to disappear. And so that evening, Elijah went to the storage space under his bed at the East Side apartment. And from a small black case, Elijah removed a compact wireless camera, smaller than a deck of cards, magnetic mount, 72-hour battery life, live feed to his phone. And Elijah charged the camera overnight. And in the morning, Elijah put it in his canvas tote. And Elijah got on the number 14 bus. Elijah did not return to storage room 2E. Compromised positions are abandoned, not defended. Instead, Elijah moved his operation to a utility corridor between the second and third floor mechanical systems, 12 feet long, 4 feet wide, concrete floor, accessed by a door painted the same shade of beige as the surrounding wall with no outside handle. A room that was not on the building's official floor plan, effectively invisible, and Elijah mounted the wireless camera inside the utility door angled at the east corridor. And then Elijah climbed back out and walked up to the third floor and took his seat in the back row. What the camera captured that Thursday afternoon between 1:15 and 2:40 p.m. was the following. At 1:52 p.m., 3 men entered the east corridor. The first was the man in the dark blazer from day 1. The second was approximately 55, silver at the temples, wearing a suit more expensive than the blazer. The third was large in the specifically constructed way of a man whose size is professional rather than natural. And these 3 men walked to a door marked authorized personnel only at the corridor's far end. And the silver-templed man produced a key, and the 3 men went through. And Elijah knew what was behind that door because Elijah had walked every corridor of this building. Authorized personnel only led to the service corridor behind the judge's chambers, and the three men were in there for 22 minutes. And when they came back out and left through the stairwell exit, Elijah ran the silver-templed man's face through a database on his laptop. The result came back in 47 seconds. Raymond Cole, primary financial intermediary between Congressman Dale Whitfield's political operation and a network of judicial system individuals who had received payments totaling $2.7 million over a decade. And Elijah circled the name, and Elijah wrote one word beneath it: tonight. The next morning, Elijah arrived at the courthouse 1 hour before it opened to the public. And Elijah was wearing over his faded green jacket a gray maintenance uniform top purchased from a workwear store on the south side. And Elijah went to the maintenance closet at the end of the north corridor on the 3rd floor and climbed the metal ladder bolted to the wall and pushed open the access panel to the crawl space above the 3rd floor ceiling. The crawl space was approximately 2 feet high. The floor was the reverse side of suspended ceiling tiles, not capable of supporting full weight, but navigable for a man moving slowly on his elbows and knees, distributing weight across multiple panels. And Elijah moved through the dark with a small headlamp and his digital recorder in his breast pocket and his phone in his left hand, following reference points he had memorized from the building's architectural drawings. 3rd ductwork junction, cable bundle running east to west. The change in framing gauge indicating the structural beam above the judge's chambers. 47 feet from the access panel, Elijah settled himself across 3 ceiling tiles directly above Courtroom 7's judge's chambers. And Elijah found the imperfection in the tile, a corner slightly lifted, never receded, and through this gap saw the desk below and the right side of the room. And Elijah waited. At 7:31 am the side door of the chambers opened, and voices entered. And Elijah pressed the record button on his digital recorder. And for 43 minutes, Elijah recorded the conversation between Judge Harold Voss and Raymond Cole regarding the predetermined conviction of Naomi Carter. The payment amount, $60,000. The payment channel, the Delaware LLC. The timeline, 2 additional weeks maximum. The 3 jurors in seats 4, 7, and 11 whose votes had been arranged. And the instruction to resolve the old man in the back row before the end of the week. And Elijah, 47 feet above this conversation, noted that resolved had been left undefined. And Elijah began moving back through the crawl space toward the access panel, because Elijah had what he needed, and because tonight he was going to knock on Priya Akafer's door. Priya Akafer's light was on at 7:45 p.m. at the Mecklenburg County Public Defender's building on East Trade Street. And Priya said, "Come in," with the flatness of someone not expecting good news. And Elijah opened the door, and Priya looked at an elderly black man in a faded green jacket carrying a canvas tote bag standing in her doorway. And Priya said, "Can I help you?" And Elijah said, "My name is James Crawford. I have been sitting in the back row of Courtroom 7 every day since the Carter trial began, and I have information you need to hear tonight." And Priya looked at this man who spoke with a precision and authority that did not match his clothes or his presentation in any framework she had available. And Priya cleared files from the chair across her desk. And Elijah sat down, and Elijah talked, and Priya listened. And Elijah laid out the envelope exchange on day 1, the 3 men in the east corridor, the authorized personnel only door, the camera footage. And then Elijah placed his digital recorder on Priya's desk. And Elijah pressed play. And for 43 minutes and 17 seconds, Priya Akafer sat across from Elijah Moss and listened to the voice of the judge presiding over her client's trial discuss the terms of her client's predetermined conviction with a financial intermediary connected to the most powerful congressional family in the district. And when the recording ended, Priya was very still. And then Priya said, "Who are you?" And Elijah said, "My name is James Crawford. I am a retired school custodian from Durham." And Priya said, "No, you are not." And Priya said, "A retired school custodian from Durham does not run covert surveillance operations in courthouse utility corridors." And Priya said, "So I am going to ask you again. Who are you?" And Elijah reached into his canvas tote and from a zippered inner pocket Elijah removed a leather card holder, and Elijah placed a card on Priya's desk, and Priya picked it up and read it, and Priya read it again. And Priya said, "You are Elijah Moss." And Elijah said, "Yes." And Priya said, "You were the state attorney general for 16 years." And Elijah said, 17. They always get that wrong. What Elijah and Priya built in that office between 7:45 and 2:17 in the morning was an architecture. A structure designed to accomplish 3 objectives simultaneously: the exoneration of Naomi Carter, the criminal prosecution of Judge Harold Voss, and the dismantling of the network that sustained him. And these 3 objectives were nested because an architecture that accomplishes all 3 simultaneously has no seams at which it can be attacked. The mistrial motion was built on the jury tampering evidence. 3 jurors in seats 4, 7, and 11 identified on the recording by seat number. A finding of jury tampering is grounds for immediate mistrial regardless of the judge's status, which meant Naomi went home. The criminal case against Voss required the recording authenticated by a forensic examiner. Elijah knew exactly who to call, plus the financial records, and a sealed filing with Chief Justice Patricia Reeves, who had known Elijah Moss for 32 years. And the congressional investigation required a separate package transmitted to the Senate Oversight Committee at the exact moment the sealed filing reached the Chief Justice, so that both moved simultaneously and neither could be delayed by the other. And Priya said, "The mistrial motion, I can write that tonight. I can have a draft by 4 a.m. And Elijah said, "Good." And then Elijah said, "One more thing. Monday morning I am going to take the same seat I have taken every day. The back row. Same jacket. Same Bible. And when Raymond Cole's man comes looking for the old man they need to resolve, I am going to walk to the front of that courtroom, and I am going to introduce myself." And Priya said, "What about the forensic authentication?" And Elijah said, "Complete before Monday morning, I promise you." And Priya said, "And the sealed filing?" And Elijah said, "Sunday morning." And Priya said, "And Naomi?" And Elijah said, "She deserves to know. Call her tonight." And Priya picked up her phone. Saturday passed in work. Sunday passed in preparation. The forensic audio examiner sent his authentication certificate at 11:14 p.m. Sunday night, backed up in 3 locations. The sealed filing reached Chief Justice Reeves at 8:47 a.m. Sunday. And Chief Justice Reeves, who said only "I wondered when you were going to surface," signed the emergency removal order at 2:15 p.m. and the arrest warrant at 3:40 p.m. and placed both under seal pending execution Monday morning at 9 a.m. 2 SBI agents from Carolyn Hughes's Judicial Integrity Unit were in position at the courthouse East Service entrance by 7 a.m. Monday. And Dina Marsh from the Charlotte Observer, Priya's law school friend, 18 years covering legal affairs, told only to be in Courtroom 7 at 9 a.m. and to bring her recorder, was in the 3rd row gallery seat by 8:45. And in the 4th row Marcus Dent had his phone and was scanning the gallery with the methodical attention of a man who had been sent to find someone. And in the back row Elijah Moss had his Bible and his legal pad and his gas station coffee. And when Marcus Dent's scan reached the back row his eyes found the old man. And this time Marcus Dent's eyes did not move on, and Marcus Dent took out his phone and typed something. And Elijah watched this without expression, and the bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Harold Voss took the bench. And it was 8:59 a.m., and the clock on the wall kept moving. At 9 a.m. Priya stood and said, "Your Honor, before we proceed with today's witnesses, the defense has a motion." And Judge Voss said, "We are in the middle of a trial, counselor. Motions should have been filed in advance." And Priya said, "This motion could not be filed in advance because the grounds for it were not available until this morning." And Priya said, "The defense moves for an immediate mistrial on the grounds of jury tampering and judicial corruption." And the courtroom went the particular kind of silent that courtrooms go when something happens that nobody was prepared for. And Conrad Brett was on his feet. And Conrad Brett said, "Objection, Your Honor. This is an outrageous and completely unfounded." And Priya said, "I have a certification from Dr. Marcus Webb senior forensic audio examiner at the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, authenticating a recording made in the private offices of this courthouse on the morning of Friday, October 14th. The recording contains the voice of the presiding judge of this trial discussing financial compensation for a predetermined verdict of guilty in the case of State of North Carolina versus Naomi Carter. The recording also identifies 3 jurors by seat number whose votes in this matter were arranged in advance, and Judge Harold Voss's face became very still. The specific stillness of a man whose 20 years of carefully maintained corruption has suddenly lost its architecture. And in the 4th row, Marcus Dent stood up and began moving toward the aisle, and Elijah Moss stood up from the back row for the first time in 3 weeks, and Elijah walked forward, not quickly, not urgently, the way a man walks when he knows exactly where he is going and has known for a long time. And the SBI agents entered through the courtroom rear door, and one moved to cut off Marcus Dent's path and the other moved toward the bench. And Marcus Dent sat back down. And Elijah walked to the bar rail at the front of the gallery, and Elijah said in a voice that filled the room from floor to ceiling, "Your Honor, I would like to address the court." And Judge Harold Voss said, "You are not a party to these proceedings. You have no standing to," and Elijah reached into his canvas tote, and Elijah placed a card on the bar rail, and the bailiff carried the card to the bench, and Judge Harold Voss looked at the card. And Judge Harold Voss said, in a voice that was very quiet, "Elijah Moss." And Elijah said, "Yes, Your Honor." And the courtroom erupted. What happened in Courtroom 7 in the 47 minutes that followed was the kind of thing courthouse observers and law school professors would spend years describing. The SBI agent handed Harold Voss the executed arrest warrant signed by Chief Justice Patricia Reeves, and Harold Voss read it, and Harold Voss looked at Naomi Carter. And Naomi looked back, not triumphant, not yet relieved, but with the specific expression of a woman who has felt for 3 weeks that something in the room was broken and is now watching the evidence of that breakage arrive in the form she always knew it would have to take eventually. And Harold Voss said to the court reporter, "Please note the time." And the court reporter said, 9:47 a.m. And Harold Voss said, "This court is in recess pending further order from the Chief Justice." And Harold Voss walked off the bench into his chambers, and the door closed, and everything happened at once. Priya was moving toward Naomi. The 12 jurors were talking in the jury box in the urgent tones of people who had been holding composure for 3 weeks and had been given permission to release it. Dina Marsh was moving toward the front with her notebook open, and Marcus Dent was sitting with his hands in his lap and the SBI agent standing in the aisle beside him. And Elijah stood at the bar rail and looked at the full room, all of it, the chaos and the noise and the motion, and Naomi Carter's face, and stood in it for a moment still, the way Elijah always stood in the middle of things. And then Elijah walked toward Naomi. Naomi Carter stood at the defense table and watched the old man in the faded jacket walk toward her through the noise of the courtroom. And Naomi had known since Priya's call on Saturday that this moment was coming, had spent 2 days sitting with the knowledge that the man in the back row was Elijah Moss, and knowing had not prepared her for seeing, because seeing was the man himself, 74 years old in a faded jacket, who had gotten on a bus every morning for 3 weeks and sat where nobody looked and built the case that was now coming apart the walls that had been built around her. And Elijah reached the defense table. And Naomi said, "Why?" And the question contained inside it everything the word why can hold. Why you? Why me? Why 4 years? Why the back row? And Elijah said, "Because someone had to, and I was still in the room." And Naomi Carter, who had not cried in Courtroom 7 in 3 weeks, put her hand over her mouth and pressed hard. And Priya put her hand on Naomi's back. And Naomi stood in the navy blue dress in the noise of a courtroom coming apart around her and did not break. But her eyes went very bright, and stayed that way. And Harold Voss was formally arrested in his chambers at 1:15 p.m., and Raymond Cole was arrested at 4 p.m., and Marcus Dent at 4:15. And Vincent, the large man who had stood guard in the private hallway, cooperated from 10 a.m., and his cooperation produced additional names and connections that the investigation would spend 6 months fully mapping. And Congressman Dale Whitfield in Washington, D.C., read Dina Marsh's alert on the Charlotte Observer website, filed from Courtroom 7 at 9:58 a.m., 4 words in the headline that contained his name, and told his chief of staff to get him all of his lawyers. The formal mistrial was declared at 11:15 a.m. by Honorable Sandra Elam from the Western District, appointed by emergency order from Chief Justice Reeves. And Judge Elam examined the authentication certificate and the arrest warrant and heard 15 minutes of argument from Priya Akafor that everyone in the room would remember for years, and declared the mistrial on grounds of judicial corruption and jury tampering. And the courtroom erupted differently this time. In the specific way a courtroom erupts when justice arrives, not with the energy of chaos, but with the warmth of something returning to its right place after a long absence. Harold Voss was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Raymond Cole received 14 years. Marcus Dent received 9. The Senate oversight inquiry into Congressman Dale Whitfield ran for 7 months and resulted in criminal referrals to the Department of Justice and charges that ended with Whitfield resigning his seat and pleading guilty to conspiracy and fraud and receiving 8 years. The school board issued a formal apology to Naomi Carter and restored her position with full back pay. And Priya filed the civil suit the same week as the mistrial and settled it for an amount that Naomi described as more than I expected and less than it should have been, which is what justice usually looks like when it arrives in the form of money. And Carolyn Hughes from the Judicial Integrity Unit called Elijah 2 weeks after the trial and said, "We are expanding. We want you to train 3 new investigators." And Elijah said, "I am 74 years old." And Carolyn said, "I know. You gave a speech about the work not stopping." And Elijah said, "I did not mean it as a personal commitment." And Carolyn said, "Here we are." And Elijah said, "I need an office with natural light." And Carolyn said, "Done." And Elijah said, "And I am not riding the number 14 bus anymore. I have done sufficient number 14 bus for a lifetime." And Carolyn laughed. And Elijah said, "All right. When do I start?" 6 weeks after the mistrial, Naomi Carter walked back into her classroom at Lincoln Elementary School on a Tuesday morning in late November. And the classroom smelled the way it always had: construction paper and dry erase markers, and the particular warmth of a room full of children that every teacher who has ever loved their work would recognize anywhere as exactly where they are supposed to be. And the 28 students stood up when Naomi walked in. Not because anyone told them to. One child stood and another saw the first and stood too, and then another and another until all 28 were on their feet. And Naomi set her bag on her desk, and Naomi looked at her class, and Naomi said, "I know I was gone a long time, and someone tried to stop me from teaching you the truth about this country's history, and it did not work, and it will not work, because the truth is not a thing that can be stopped. It can be delayed and argued against and made painful, but it does not stop. And the reason it does not stop is because there are people who spend their whole lives making sure it keeps moving. People who sit in rooms where nobody is paying attention to them and do the work anyway." And Naomi said, "That is the kind of person I want you to grow up to be. Not famous, not powerful, just present, just working, just in the room." And a girl in the front row named Destiny raised her hand, and Naomi said, "Yes, Destiny." And Destiny said, "Who are the people in the room?" And Naomi said, "That is a very good question. I will tell you about one of them. On the last Tuesday of November, after school had ended, Elijah Moss knocked on the door of Naomi Carter's classroom. And Naomi said, "Come in." And Elijah came in and looked at the room, the construction paper projects, the books in the reading corner, the pencil drawings taped above the whiteboard, each labeled with a child's first name. And Elijah said, "It is a good classroom." And Naomi said, "Yes." And Naomi said, "Thank you for all of it. The 4 years in the back row and the ceiling and the number 14 bus." And Naomi said, "Why did you?" And Elijah said, "My first case as a young attorney was a teacher. In a county 2 hours east of here. 1969. A black woman who had been teaching for 12 years and was fired for teaching her students about voter registration. And the room was arranged against her. And I was young and I did not yet know how to unarrange a room. And I watched her lose. And I thought about her for 50 years, every case, every room. I thought about the teacher who lost because I did not yet know how to win. And Naomi said, what was her name? And Elijah said, Ruth Anna Hayes. And Elijah said, she is 87 years old and she lives in Goldsboro. And Elijah said, I visited her last week. And Naomi said, what did you tell her? And Elijah said, I told her about you. And Naomi said, what did she say? And Elijah said, she said it was about time. And Naomi went to the reading corner and picked up a book, a children's book about the civil rights movement, state-approved curriculum, on the shelf where it had always been. And Naomi held it out to Elijah. And Elijah took it and looked at the cover. And the illustration showed people marching, brave and afraid and doing it anyway. And Elijah held the book for a moment. And Elijah said, keep teaching it. And Naomi said, I intend to. And Elijah walked out of the classroom and down the corridor and through the front entrance of Lincoln Elementary School into the November afternoon. Cold and clear and vivid the way late autumn makes everything look. And a state vehicle was waiting at the curb, the beginning of the new arrangement with Carolyn Hughes's office. And Elijah got in, and the car pulled away. And in the classroom on the second floor, Naomi Carter turned back to her lesson plan for tomorrow and picked up her pen and continued. And the back row of Courtroom 7 was empty the following Monday morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Until one morning a young man came in through the public entrance and walked to the third floor and pushed open the door of Courtroom 7 and sat down in the back row. And the young man opened a legal pad, and the young man uncapped his pen, and the young man waited, and nobody in the courtroom noticed him, not the attorneys, not the judge, not anyone. And that was exactly the way it needed to be, because the work does not stop. It only moves to the next room. Thank you for joining us. Make sure to drop your comment telling us where you're watching from. Don't forget to watch and subscribe. See you in the next one.